In the dusty streets of Copper Springs, 1875, a scene unfolds that will be whispered about for generations. Sarah Mitchell stands alone at the altar, her factory-worn hands clutching a wilting bouquet, as Thomas Clayton, son of the town's mercantile owner, declares he cannot marry common stock. Cruel laughter echoes through the church as Sarah's world crumbles around her. But fate has other plans. Just as she turns to flee, boot steps echo on wooden floorboards. Marcus Blackwood, owner of the largest ranch in the territory, stands in the doorway. His weathered face holds no judgment, only quiet determination as he walks down the aisle, not to mock, but to offer his hand in marriage. Could a man who has everything see something in a factory girl that even she couldn't see in herself? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The brass time card clicked into place with a familiar thunk as Sarah Mitchell began another day at the Copper Springs textile mill. Dawn's first light hadn't yet touched the mountaintops, but the factory floor already hummed with the rhythmic clatter of spinning jennies and power looms. She flexed her fingers, remembering her mother's hands, how they'd looked just the same at 35, worn smooth and strong from years of similar work. Sarah navigated the maze of machinery with practiced grace, nodding to Mary Beth and Eleanor at their stations. The air hung thick with cotton fibers that danced in shafts of dim light from the high windows. These same particles had taken her. Father, 3 years ago, his lungs finally giving out after 2 decades of breathing the textile dust. But the mill had also given them life, had put food on their table, and allowed Sarah to help support her younger siblings after his passing. "Morning, Miss Mitchell," called Mr. Henderson, the floor supervisor, his voice carrying a note of unusual respect. Most factory girls earned little more than curt instructions, but Sarah's reputation for maintaining the most efficient station and training new workers had earned her a measure of regard, even from management. She settled at her loom, fingers automatically checking the tension of 100 different threads. The repetitive motion was meditative, allowing her mind to wander to the evening ahead. Another dinner with Thomas Clayton. Even now, 6 months into their courtship, it seemed impossible that the son of Copper Springs' most prominent merchant would look twice at a factory girl. Their romance had begun unexpectedly, with a chance encounter at Henderson's general store. Sarah had been purchasing thread for her mother's mending work when Thomas knocked over a display of buttons, sending them scattering across the wooden floor. As they both knelt to gather the wayward buttons, their hands had touched, and Thomas had looked at her, really looked at her, with those striking blue eyes. "I've seen you," he'd said, "walking to the mill each morning. You're always the first one there, aren't you?" Sarah had nodded, surprised he'd noticed. "The early light's the best for checking the machines," she'd replied, then immediately worried she'd said too much. Factory work wasn't a suitable topic for conversation with a gentleman, but Thomas had seemed genuinely interested, asking questions about her work, her family, her life. He'd insisted on carrying her packages home, and by the time they reached her modest house on the outskirts of town, Sarah had fallen a little in love with his easy charm and gentle manners. The courtship that followed felt like something from a penny dreadful romance. Thomas brought her flowers, took her on buggy rides through town, and spoke of a future filled with promise. Her mother had worried, men of his station often play at romance with factory girls, but they marry their own kind. But Sarah had believed Thomas was different. He spoke of changing times, of merit mattering more than birth, of building a new kind of life together. The steady rhythm of the loom matched her heartbeat as Sarah remembered their most recent evening together, planning the wedding. Thomas had seemed distracted, distant even, but she'd attributed it to the natural nerves of an approaching marriage. Now, watching the threads interlace beneath her practiced hands, she wondered if she'd missed something important in her eagerness to believe in their fairy tale. "Sarah!" Mary Beth's urgent whisper broke through her reverie. "Your mother's here!" Sarah's head snapped up. Margaret Mitchell stood in the doorway of the factory floor, her face pale beneath her bonnet. Mr. Henderson was already striding toward her station, no doubt to dock her pay for the interruption, but her mother's presence during working hours could only mean something was terribly wrong. The time card clicked again as Sarah punched out, the brass face recording the shortest shift. She'd worked in 8 years at the mill. She didn't know then that it would also be her last. The town notice board outside Henderson's general store told the story of Copper Springs better than any history book could. Posted prominently at the top was an announcement for the upcoming Merchants Association meeting, printed on fine cream-colored paper. Below it hung notices for church socials, carefully penned in elegant script. And at the bottom, crowded together on cheap newsprint, were help-wanted notices for the mill, mine, and local farms, the sort of work that calloused hands and bent backs. Rebecca Clayton, Thomas's mother, stood before that same board now, lips pursed as she read the wedding announcement. Her silk-gloved finger traced the letters of her son's name, then stopped abruptly at Sarah Mitchell. The gesture wasn't lost on the small group of ladies gathered for their morning shopping. "To think," whispered Mrs. Whitaker behind her fan, "a Clayton marrying straight out of the factory floor. Whatever is Thomas thinking?" "It's this modern age," Mrs. Henderson replied, adjusting her hatpins. "All these new ideas about social mobility. In my day, people knew their place." Sarah heard these whispers as she passed, carrying a basket of mending for her mother. She'd grown accustomed to such talk over the past months, had learned to hold her head high even as the fine ladies of Copper Springs discussed her as if she were invisible. But Rebecca Clayton's presence made her pause, heart hammering against her ribs. The older woman turned, fixing Sarah with a gaze that could have frozen the summer air. "Miss Mitchell," she said, her voice carrying just far enough to reach the gathered audience. "I wonder if I might have a word." The conversation that followed in the shade of the general store's awning would haunt Sarah's dreams for months to come. Rebecca Clayton's words were perfectly polite, even kind on the surface, but their meaning cut deeper than any factory blade. "You must understand, dear, that marriage into the Clayton family carries certain responsibilities. Thomas will be expected to take over the mercantile empire his father has built. His wife must be prepared to host socials, to serve on charitable boards, to move in the proper circles. I'm sure you're a lovely girl, but—" "I can learn," Sarah interrupted, surprising herself with her own boldness. "I've already started, reading books on etiquette, and Mrs. Patterson at the church has offered to teach me proper hosting." Rebecca's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Some things, my dear, cannot be learned from books. They must be bred in the bone." That evening, as Sarah recounted the encounter to Thomas in the parlor of her family's modest home, she searched his face for some sign of the righteous anger she felt. Instead, she found only a carefully neutral expression that made her stomach twist with uncertainty. "Mother means well," he said finally, adjusting his cravat. "She's just concerned about our future, about maintaining the family's position in society." "And you," Sarah asked quietly, "are you concerned about maintaining your position?" Thomas reached for her hand, but his grip lacked its usual warmth. "Of course not. But perhaps we could delay the wedding a bit? Give you time to acquire more refinement?" The word hung in the air between them like the cotton dust in the factory, invisible but choking. Sarah withdrew her hand, remembering her mother's warnings. 8 years at the loom had taught her to recognize when a thread was about to snap. "How long?" she asked, though she already knew the answer wouldn't matter. "Just until things settle," Thomas replied, not meeting her eyes. "Until Mother comes around, until we can be sure this is right for everyone." Through the parlor window, Sarah could see the last light of day painting the mountains gold. She thought of the notice board, of hierarchies written in paper quality and ink, of Rebecca Clayton's silk gloves and cutting words. She thought of her own hands, strong and capable, and wondered why they weren't enough. "Nothing will ever settle," she said softly, "because nothing is unsettled except your own heart, Thomas." He left shortly after, promising to call again tomorrow, to explain better, to make her understand. Sarah watched him go from the front porch, the same porch where he had first kissed her beneath a spring moon. As his figure disappeared down the dusty street, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry at her own foolishness in believing that love could bridge the divide between their worlds. The next time she saw Thomas Clayton, it would be at the altar, and he would have an entirely different kind of truth to share. The torn wedding invitation lay on Sarah's dressing table, its gilt edges catching the morning light. The elegant script promised the honor of your presence, though honor seemed a fragile thing now, as Sarah stood before her mirror in her mother's altered wedding dress. The fabric, yellowed with age but lovingly pressed, whispered against the wooden floorboards as she turned. "You look beautiful," Margaret Mitchell said, pinning the last of the borrowed orange blossoms into her daughter's hair. Her voice carried the weight of unspoken worry, but her hands were steady, hands that had guided spinning jennies and raised 4 children alone. "The flowers are wilting," Sarah observed, touching the small bouquet that Mary Beth had gathered from her garden. "At dawn, simple wildflowers, not the hothouse roses Thomas had originally ordered. They'll last through the ceremony," her mother assured her, though they both knew the real concern wasn't about flowers. The church bells began their morning toll as Sarah and her family made their way down the dirt road. Factory workers lined the street, having taken their precious Sunday morning to see one of their own marry into Copper Springs elite. Their faces showed a mix of pride and uncertainty that mirrored Sarah's own heart. Inside the church, the division was stark. The Clayton side overflowed with fine dresses and morning coats, while the Mitchell side held fellow mill workers in their Sunday best, freshly scrubbed but unable to completely hide the indigo stains of their trade beneath their fingernails. Thomas waited at the altar, his back rigid in his new suit. He hadn't come to the rehearsal dinner the night before. Pressing business, his note had said. Now, as Sarah began her walk down the aisle on her uncle's arm, she saw Thomas's fingers working at his collar, saw Rebecca Clayton's triumphant smile, saw the minister's slight frown. The first warning came in Thomas's eyes as she reached him. They were focused somewhere over her shoulder, refusing to meet her gaze. The second was in how he didn't take her hand, leaving her to stand alone before God and the assembled congregation. Thomas began, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat and started again, louder this time. "I cannot go through with this." The words fell like stones in still water, ripples of whispers spreading through the church. "It's not right." Thomas continued, gaining strength as he spoke to the air above Sarah's head. "Not right for anyone. I cannot bind myself to common stock. My family's position, our responsibilities to the community. Mother was right. Some things cannot be overcome." Sarah stood perfectly still, her mother's dress suddenly heavy as lead on her shoulders. She heard Mary Beth's sharp intake of breath from the front pew, heard Rebecca Clayton's satisfied sigh, heard the rustle of fine fabric as the society ladies leaned forward for a better view of her humiliation. "Common stock," she repeated softly, the factory term for raw cotton hitting her like a physical blow. All those months of Thomas praising her refinement, her quick mind, her gentle ways, and, in the end, she was just raw material to him, unfinished, unworthy. The first laugh came from somewhere in the Clayton section, a young woman behind her fan. Others followed, growing in volume and cruelty. Sarah felt her face flush, felt tears threatening, felt the weight of every eye in the church. She turned to flee, her mother's careful pinning coming loose, orange blossoms scattering like her dreams across the church floor. But before she could take a step, a new sound cut through the laughter, boot heels on wooden boards, steady and purposeful. The church door stood open to the morning sun, and in its frame stood Marcus Blackwood. His presence seemed to fill the A doorway, though he wasn't an unusually large man. It was something in how he held himself, in the quiet authority that radiated from his weathered features. The laughter died. Even Rebecca Clayton's triumphant expression faltered. Marcus Blackwood owned more land than all the Clayton holdings combined, and his word carried weight in 3 counties. Now he stood in his best black coat, his grey eyes taking in the scene before him with careful consideration. Sarah felt the tears on her cheeks but couldn't move to wipe them away. The wilting flowers trembled in her grip as Marcus Blackwood began to walk down the aisle, his steps unhurried but deliberate. He passed Thomas without a glance, coming to stop before Sarah. For the first time that morning, someone looked directly into her eyes. Marcus Blackwood's silver pocket watch caught the light filtering through the church's stained glass windows as he drew it from his vest. The timepiece was well worn but immaculately maintained, much like the man himself. He studied its face for a moment before returning it to his pocket, as if confirming he had all the time in the world for what he was about to do. "Miss Mitchell," he said, his voice carrying easily through the hushed church without being raised. "I believe I owe you an apology." Sarah blinked, confusion momentarily overtaking her humiliation. "Sir, I've watched you walk to the mill every morning for the past 3 years, Marcus continued, his tone conversational, as if they weren't. "Standing before a congregation hungry for scandal. Always first to arrive, last to leave. I've seen you help younger girls learn the looms, share your lunch with those who had none, tend to injured workers before the doctor could arrive." He turned slightly, including the whole church in his next words. "I've watched you manage your family's accounts at Henderson's store, bargaining fairly but shrewdly. I've observed how you've helped your mother keep 3 younger siblings in school since your father's passing." Rebecca Clayton's face had turned an interesting shade of purple, but Marcus wasn't finished. "In all that time, I never once introduced myself or expressed my admiration for your character. That, Miss Mitchell, is what I'm apologizing for." Sarah stood transfixed, her wilting bouquet forgotten in her hands. Marcus Blackwood had noticed her, had seen and understood her daily life when even Thomas, who claimed to love her, had never truly comprehended it. "The worth of a person," Marcus continued, his grey eyes steady on hers, "isn't found in their birth or bank account, but in their actions, in their heart, in how they treat others when they think no one of consequence is watching." He reached into his coat and withdrew. A small leather pouch. The sound of it hitting the floor made everyone jump, the distinct ring of coins spilling across wooden boards. "There's your dowry money, Clayton," Marcus said, still not looking at Thomas. "I believe that settles any financial obligations between your families." Then, with deliberate care, Marcus Blackwood went down on one knee before Sarah. A collective gasp rippled through the church. Here was the largest landowner in 3 counties, kneeling before a factory girl. "Miss Sarah Mitchell," he said, "I'm 42 years old, somewhat set in my ways, and far from the most charming man in Copper Springs. But I know quality when I see it, whether in horseflesh, land, or people. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Sarah's mind whirled. This couldn't be real. Yet the steadiness in Marcus's eyes, the quiet dignity of his bearing, grounded her in the moment's truth. "Why?" she managed to whisper. "Because I've watched you show more grace, wisdom, and strength of character in the past hour than most people manage in a lifetime," he replied. "Because I believe you would make not just a good wife, but an excellent partner in running the ranch. Because I've spent 3 years admiring you from afar, and I'm tired of waiting for a proper introduction." A laugh bubbled up in Sarah's throat, not the hysterical kind that threatened earlier, but something genuine, born of surprise and dawning hope. "We haven't even had a proper conversation, Mr. Blackwood." "Marcus," he corrected gently. "And I'm hoping we'll have a lifetime of conversations, if you're willing." From the front pew, Sarah heard her mother's sharp intake of breath. From the Clayton side came outraged murmurs. But for the first time that morning, Sarah felt steady, on her feet. "You understand, I know nothing about ranching," she said. You understand I know nothing about factory work, he countered. Perhaps we can learn from each other. Sarah looked down at her mother's altered wedding dress, at the wilting flowers in her hands, at the scattered coins by Thomas's feet. Then she looked at Marcus Blackwood, still kneeling patiently, his silver pocket watch marking time in his vest pocket, as he waited for her answer. Yes, she said clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. Yes, I would be honored to be your wife. Marcus rose smoothly, taking her hand as if they'd done this 1,000 times before. His palm was warm and calloused, working hands like her own. Without a word, he turned her toward the minister, who had been watching the proceedings with increasingly raised eyebrows. Reverend, Marcus said calmly, I believe you still have a wedding to perform. Unless, of course, you object to joining a rancher and a factory girl in holy matrimony. The minister, who happened to lease his house from Blackwood Ranch, cleared his throat. No objection at all, Mr. Blackwood. Shall we begin? In the quiet of her mother's kitchen, Sarah twisted her mother's wedding ring around her finger, the same ring she'd nearly walked down the aisle wearing for Thomas. Now, it caught the afternoon light differently, as if even this small circle of gold understood that everything had changed. You don't have to do this, Margaret Mitchell said softly, setting a cup of tea before her daughter. The familiar scent of chamomile filled the kitchen, but couldn't quite mask the lingering aroma of the bread they'd baked that morning. Bread for a wedding celebration that had transformed into something entirely unexpected. He's a good man. Mama. Sarah traced the worn edge of the ring, smoothed by decades of her mother's work. Everyone says so. Everyone says he's a fair employer and an honest businessman, her mother corrected. That's not the same as knowing if he'll make a good husband. You don't know him, Sarah. The truth of those words settled heavily in the room. Sarah had said yes in the church, partly out of genuine appreciation for Marcus's gesture, partly to salvage her dignity, but mostly because something in his steady gaze had promised safety, respect, and perhaps even understanding. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Mary Beth burst in, her face flushed with excitement. The whole town's talking. Mrs. Henderson says Mr. Blackwood just walked into the mercantile and bought out Thomas Clayton's entire stake in the business. Paid cash on the barrel. Sarah's hand tightened around her teacup. He didn't have to do that. That's not all, Mary Beth continued, dropping into a kitchen chair. He told Mr. Clayton Sr. that if Thomas ever speaks an unkind word about you again, he'll buy out the rest of the family's shares too. Can you imagine the Claytons working for wages like the rest of us? The ring felt heavier on Sarah's finger. Marcus was fighting her battles already, wielding his wealth and influence like a sword. Was this to be her life now, protected but powerless? As if reading her thoughts, her mother reached across the table and covered Sarah's hand with her own. You can still say no, child. We'd manage. But would they? Sarah thought of her siblings, of the factory wages that barely kept food on the table, of her sister Emily's dreams of attending the teachers' college in Denver. Marcus Blackwood could make those dreams possible with the stroke of a pen. Another knock, more formal this time. Sarah knew before her mother opened the door that it would be Marcus. He stood on their modest porch in his church clothes, hat in hand, looking somehow both imposing and uncertain. Miss Mitchell, he said, then corrected himself. Sarah, might I have a word? Her mother and Mary Beth retreated to the kitchen, though Sarah knew they'd be listening to every word. She stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind her. I realize, Marcus began, that I've put you in an awkward position. Offering marriage to a woman I barely know in front of the whole town might seem either romantic or foolish, depending on one's perspective. Which do you think it was? Sarah asked. A slight smile touched his lips. Both, perhaps. But I want you to know that my offer was sincere, not just a gesture to save your pride. However, he paused, choosing his words carefully. If you wish to cry off, I'll understand. I'll still ensure the Claytons never harm your reputation. And I can arrange for you to take a position at my sister's millinery shop in Denver if you'd prefer a fresh start. Sarah studied him in the afternoon light. His face was weathered but honest, his grey eyes direct. No pretty words or grand gestures now, just a straightforward offer of choice. "And if I don't cry off?" she asked. "What then?" "Then we learn to be partners," he said simply. "I won't pretend love, Sarah. That would be dishonest to both of us. But I offer respect, protection, and the freedom to become whatever you wish to be. In time, perhaps friendship, maybe even more." Sarah touched her mother's ring again, thinking of all it represented: duty, sacrifice, unexpected joy, enduring strength. "I don't want protection if it means being powerless," she said finally. "I won't trade one cage for another, no matter how gilded." "I wouldn't expect you to," Marcus replied. "I've watched you manage that factory floor for 3 years. I could use that kind of capability at the ranch. We have 40 hands, 3 foremen, and accounts with every business in 3 counties. It's not so different from running looms, just more horses and fewer spindles." A laugh escaped her, surprising them both. "You make it sound so practical." "Isn't it? 2 people, joining forces to build something worthwhile?" He gestured toward the street, where curious townspeople were, trying to appear as if they weren't watching. "Let them have their romance and scandal. We'll have something better, a partnership of equals." Sarah looked down at her mother's ring one last time, then back at Marcus. "Yes," she said, and this time the word felt like a choice rather than an escape. "Yes, I'll marry you, not because I have to, but because I want to see what we might build together." The ranch deed hung framed in Marcus's study. Their study now. Sarah corrected herself. The yellow document dated back to 1851, when Marcus's father had first claimed this stretch of valley and hillside. In the morning light, Sarah could trace the elegant script that marked out the boundaries, from the lightning-struck oak at Crystal Creek to the 3-peaked ridge, thence to the old Indian Trail. The land had a poetry to it, even on paper. "It's different from the factory ledgers, isn't it?" Marcus's voice came from the doorway, making her start slightly. She hadn't heard him approach. Another adjustment she'd have to make. The mill's constant clatter had always announced everyone's movements. "The language is prettier," she admitted, "but the principles are the same. Assets, responsibilities, records to be kept." He nodded, pleased by her understanding. "Speaking of records, Mrs. Torres is waiting in the kitchen. She's managed the house for 15 years, and I thought you might want to review the household accounts with her." Sarah smoothed her skirts, her new skirts, ordered from Denver at Marcus's insistence. "Will she resent my taking over?" "Eleanor," Marcus actually chuckled. "She's been praying for someone to take the accounts off her hands. Numbers give her a headache, but she was the only one I trusted to keep things honest." The kitchen proved to be a domain unto itself, warm with the scent of baking bread and strong coffee. Elena Torres looked up from a scatter of papers on the broad wooden table, her dark eyes sharp and assessing. "So," she said, "you're the factory girl who knows figures." There was no judgment in her tone, only practical interest. "Can you read Spanish?" "No," Sarah admitted, "but I can learn." Elena's face softened. "Good answer. Sit. We have supply lists in 2 languages, 6 different vendors, and 3 feuding ranch hands' wives who all want their husbands to have the best cuts of meat. Show me how you'd organize this." For the next 2 hours, Sarah immersed herself in the familiar comfort of numbers and logistics. It wasn't so different from managing the mill's supply chain, just beef instead of cotton, hay rather than thread. Elena watched her work, occasionally offering context about which hands had large families to feed, which vendors could be trusted to deliver on time. "You'll do," she announced finally, gathering her shawl. "The house is yours, Senora. Just don't change my kitchen without consulting me first." Sarah smiled, recognizing the olive branch. "I wouldn't dare, though I might ask you to teach me your bread recipe." "That," Elena said with dignity, "will take years, but we can start tomorrow." The rest of the day passed in a whirl of introductions and discoveries. The foreman, John Cooper, showed her the main barn with its organized chaos of tack and tools. Young Tommy, the stable boy, demonstrated how each horse liked to be approached. Sarah filled pages in a small notebook, determined to learn every name, every process, every detail that might help her become more than just the boss's new wife. As sunset painted the mountains gold, she found herself on the wide porch, watching the hands return from the day's work. Marcus approached quietly, offering her a cup of tea. "Overwhelming?" he asked. "Different," she replied, "but not in a bad way. The rhythm here, it's slower than the mill, but just as purposeful." He leaned against the porch rail, his own coffee cup steaming. "Cooper says you spent an hour learning about our leather-working setup. It's not unlike maintaining the looms," Sarah explained. "Different materials, but the same principles of repair and care, though I admit I never had to worry about the cotton trying to kick me." That earned her another chuckle. "You'll learn. You're already handling Elena better than I did my first year running the place." Sarah sipped her tea, considering. "She's like Mary Beth at the mill, knows everything about everyone, keeps the small problems from becoming big ones. Every workplace needs someone like that." "You see people clearly," Marcus observed. "That's a rare gift." "Hey, the mill taught me that," she said. "When your life depends on the person next to you watching for broken threads or machinery gone wrong, you learn to read people quickly." A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the sunset paint the valley in deepening shades of purple and gold. The ranch hands' children played in the dusty yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. From the kitchen came the clatter of Elena preparing dinner, and from the barn the soft nickering of horses being settled for the night. "It's not what you imagined for yourself," Marcus said finally. "I know that." Sarah thought of the factory's endless noise, of Thomas's false promises, of her mother's warnings about marrying above her station. Then she looked at the ranch deed hanging in the study behind them, at the land spread out before her, like a kingdom waiting to be understood. "No," she agreed, "it's not what I imagined, but maybe that's not a bad thing." Sarah discovered Marcus's library on a rainy afternoon, 2 weeks into their marriage. The door had always been unlocked, but something about the quiet sanctuary of floor-to-ceiling books had seemed too personal to intrude upon without invitation. Today, however, the sound of Marcus's voice reading aloud drew her in like a moth to flame. He sat in a worn leather chair, spectacles perched on his nose, reading to Tommy's younger sister Katie, who sat cross-legged on a faded Persian rug. The girl's clothes were patched but clean, her eyes wide, as Marcus's rich voice brought Jane Eyre to life. "I am no bird, and no net ensnares me. I am a free human being with an independent will," he read, then glanced up to find Sarah in the doorway. Instead of stopping, he simply smiled and gestured for her to enter. Katie turned, ready to surrender her story time, but Sarah shook her head and settled quietly into a window seat. The rain painted patterns on the glass as Marcus continued reading, his voice lending dignity to Jane's declaration of independence. When the chapter ended, Katie reluctantly gathered her shawl. "Same time next week, Mr. Blackwood?" "Same time," he agreed. "And remember, don't tell the other hands' children," she finished. "It's our secret." She bobbed a quick curtsy to Sarah and slipped out into the rain. "How many secrets like this do you keep?" Sarah asked, running her fingers along the nearest shelf. Philosophy, poetry, novels, scientific treatises, the collection spoke of a hungry mind and years of careful curation. "Enough," Marcus replied, removing his spectacles. "Katie has a quick mind and few opportunities. Her father's worried she'll get above herself reading such things, so we pretend it's just an errand to help dust the library." Sarah smiled, remembering her own childhood hunger for books, satisfied only by scraps of newspaper and borrowed dime novels, and the other secrets. Marcus rose, returning Jane Eyre to its place. "Cooper's boy wants to be a doctor. I slip him medical texts when I can. Elena's grandson is teaching me Spanish in exchange for mathematics lessons. The widow Carson's daughters come for piano practice when their mother's at church." "You're running a secret school," Sarah realized, wonder and amusement coloring her voice. Knowledge shouldn't be locked away behind wealth or status, he said simply. Then with a hint of uncertainty, does it bother you? Bother me. Sarah moved deeper into the room, inhaling the leather and paper scent of learning. I spent every Sunday for 3 years teaching younger mill workers to read by lamplight. We used discarded labels from cotton bales as primers. Something shifted. In Marcus's expression, recognition perhaps, or confirmation of what he'd suspected about her. He crossed to a particular shelf and drew out a volume bound in green cloth. Adam Smith, he said, offering her the book, The Wealth of Nations. You might find his thoughts on labor and value interesting given your experience. Sarah accepted the book, noting how naturally it fit in her hands. You're not afraid I'll get above myself, Sarah, he said quietly. I'm counting on it. Over the next few weeks, the library became their evening sanctuary. Sarah would bring the household accounts or ranch correspondence to review, while Marcus handled business letters or ranch records. They worked in comfortable silence, broken occasionally by shared observations or questions. She discovered his passion for engineering, texts, his weakness for poetry, his careful notations in the margins of scientific journals. He found her devouring economics treatises, practicing her Spanish in Elena's cookbooks, sketching improved designs for the ranch's irrigation system based on principles she'd learned maintaining factory machinery. One evening, as thunder growled, in the distance, Marcus looked up from his ledgers to find Sarah frowning over a particularly complex passage in The Wealth of Nations. Troubled, he asked. Smith claims the division of labor increases productivity, she said, and he's right. I saw it in the mill. But he doesn't account for the cost to the workers, how it breaks down the human spirit to do the same small task endlessly. And what would you suggest instead? Balance, she replied thoughtfully. Like here on the ranch, everyone has their specialty, yes, but also knows enough of each other's work to help when needed. It's more human. Marcus set aside his papers. You should write that down. Your perspectives on labor and management, comparing the factory system to ranch operations. It could be valuable. Sarah blinked. Who would want to read the opinions of a factory girl turned rancher's wife? The same sort of people who want to read the thoughts of a self-educated Scottish professor, he answered, tapping her copy of Smith. Experience matters more than credentials, Sarah. You've lived what he only theorized about. The rain fell harder outside, drumming against the library's windows. Inside, the lamplight caught the gold leaf on hundreds of spines, each one containing worlds of possibility. Sarah looked at Marcus, this man who collected knowledge like others collected silver, who saw value in mines others overlooked, who had recognized something in her that she was only beginning to see in herself. Perhaps, she said slowly, I will write it down. After all, we have quite a library here for research. His smile, warm and approving, felt like sunlight after rain. The forged land document lay on Marcus's desk like a coiled snake. Sarah stared at the elaborate letterhead of the Clayton Mercantile Company, her fingers tracing the familiar loops of Thomas's signature, now rendered sinister by context. The morning sun through the study windows seemed to mock the document's shadows, illuminating the careful fraud hidden beneath legitimate business language. Mary Beth brought this? Marcus asked, his voice carefully neutral. Sarah nodded. Her brother works as a clerk for the Clayton's lawyer. He found it while filing papers. She swallowed hard. The date, Marcus. Look at the date. 3 months before your wedding day, he confirmed, studying the document. A contract with the Eastern Mill Corporation for the purchase of... He paused, understanding dawning in his eyes. The entire factory district, including the worker housing. Thomas never wanted to marry me, Sarah said, the words tasting bitter. He was courting me to keep me quiet, to keep me from warning the other workers. He knew I saw the ledgers, knew I might notice if the ownership changed hands. Marcus sat back in his chair, grey eyes thoughtful. The Eastern Mill Corporation has a reputation. They buy local mills, slash wages, squeeze every penny of profit they can before moving on. They've left ghost towns across 3 states. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. Mary Beth says they're planning to announce the sale next month. Most of the workers have lived in those houses for generations. Their gardens, their communities, their children's schools. All of it would be lost. And Thomas Clayton would walk away with a tidy profit, Marcus added, safely married to the banker's daughter in Denver by then. The pieces fell into place with terrible clarity. Thomas's insistence on a long engagement, his mother's sudden push to break them apart, the timing of the public humiliation, all orchestrated to discredit her if she tried to raise the alarm. "I have to warn them," Sarah said, rising. "The mill workers trust me. If I explain—" "Wait." Marcus held up a hand. "This document alone isn't enough. We need more proof, a way to fight this legally." He picked up the contract, studying the signatures. "Clayton Sr. is no fool. He wouldn't leave himself vulnerable unless—" His voice trailed off as he reached for another document from his desk. "Unless what?" "Unless he's desperate." Marcus spread out a map of the county. "Look here. The railroad's planning a new spur. Line. If it follows the expected route through Crystal Creek, the Clayton holdings would triple in value. But if it follows the alternate route through the factory district, the Eastern Mill Corporation would control the most valuable land in the county," Sarah finished. "They're not just buying the factory, they're buying the future of Copper Springs itself." Marcus nodded grimly. "And they're using the Clayton family's social standing as cover. Who would question a respected merchant selling some properties? By the time anyone realized the scope of it, it would be too late." Sarah paced the study, her mind racing. 8 years of factory work had taught her how systems connected, how one broken thread could unravel an entire fabric. "The workers' contracts," she said suddenly. "They're with the current mill owner, not the building owner. If the Eastern Mill Corporation takes over, every worker would have to sign a new contract," Marcus confirmed, "or leave, with nowhere to go, since they'd lose their homes too." Sarah felt sick. How many families would be destroyed? How many children would have to leave school to work? How many elderly workers would be cast aside? A knock at the door interrupted her dark thoughts. Elena entered with the morning mail, her expression concerned. "Senora, there's trouble at the mill. They've posted new rules. No more children helping after school, no more garden plots behind the houses, no more taking home spare cotton for personal use." Sarah met Marcus's eyes. "It's starting already. They're tightening control before the sale, making sure no one has any resources to fall back on." Marcus rose, decision clear in his bearing. "Eleanor, tell Cooper I need him." "Sarah." He paused, studying her face. "This isn't just about stopping a land grab anymore. This is about protecting people who can't protect themselves. Are you ready for what that might mean?" Sarah thought of the factory girls who'd shared their bread with her after her father died, of the older women who taught her to manage the looms, of Katie reading Jane Eyre in the library, dreaming of a bigger life. She picked up the forged document, its false promises now clear as day. "I was born ready, Marcus. The Claytons thought I was just a factory girl who reached too high. Time to show them how wrong they were." The morning sun caught the gold lettering on the contract, making it shine like fool's gold, bright and worthless. But Sarah's determination shone brighter, tempered now by understanding and purpose. The game Thomas Clayton had started with. False courtship would end with true justice, or she wasn't a Mitchell or a Blackwood at all. The stack of yellowed newspaper clippings spread across the library table told a damning story. Sarah and Marcus had spent the evening piecing together the Clayton family's history, each faded article adding another layer to their understanding. The oldest, dating back 15 years, detailed similar land deals in other towns, always following the same pattern. "Mountain View 1860, Sarah read aloud. "Local merchant Jonathan Clayton assists in modernization effort." Then 3 months later, Milltown residents displaced as new owners restructure operations. She pushed the clipping aside, reaching for another. Silver Creek, 1865. Pine Valley, 1868. Each time the Claytons acted as the respectable front for Eastern Mill Corporation's takeover. And each time, Marcus added, they moved on before the consequences became clear. He held up a daguerreotype from an illustrated newspaper showing abandoned worker housing in Mountain View. These aren't business deals gone wrong. This is in their business model. A knock at the library door interrupted their research. Elena entered carrying a tray of coffee and looking troubled. "Senora, there's talk in town. The Clayton boy has returned from Denver." Sarah's hands stilled on the newspapers. "Thomas is back. See, and with company. Men in fine suits, speaking about progress and modernization." Elena's dark eyes held warning. "They're calling a town meeting for tomorrow." Marcus rose, his expression grim. "They're moving faster than we expected. The railroad survey must have spooked them." "We're not ready," Sarah said, frustration coloring her voice. "We need more proof, more time to organize the workers." Time just ran out. Marcus began gathering the most damning articles. "Elena, spread the word to the ranch hands' families. Anyone with relatives at the mill needs to get them to that meeting." After Elena left, Sarah stood at the window, watching rain gather over the mountains. "They'll try to discredit me again," she said quietly. "Paint me as a jilted woman spreading lies out of spite. Let them try." Marcus's voice held steel. "You're not alone this time." The town hall the next evening was packed to the rafters. Mill workers and their families crowded the back and sides, while Copper Springs merchants and leading citizens occupied the front rows. Thomas Clayton stood at the podium, looking prosperous in a new suit from Denver. Behind him sat three men. Sarah didn't recognize. Representatives from Eastern Mill, she assumed. "Friends and neighbors," Thomas began, his practiced charm filling the room. "We're here tonight to discuss an exciting opportunity for Copper Springs. Progress is coming to our little town, and progress for whom?" The question came from Sarah, who had risen from her seat beside Marcus. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to her. Thomas's practiced smile faltered for just a moment. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, emphasizing her married name like a weapon. "This is hardly the time for personal grievances." "This isn't personal, Mr. Clayton," Sarah replied, her factory-trained voice carrying to every corner. "This is about business. Specifically your family's business of helping Eastern Mill Corporation destroy communities for profit." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Thomas's face darkened. These are serious accusations from someone who, until recently, was merely a factory worker. "Yes, I was a factory worker," Sarah agreed, moving to the center aisle. "I'm proud of it, which is why I recognize this pattern." She pulled out the newspaper clippings, holding them up. "Mountain View, Silver Creek, Pine Valley. The Clayton family has played this game before." One of the Eastern Mill representatives stood, his voice smooth as oil. "Mrs. Blackwood appears to be confusing normal business transactions with some sort of conspiracy. I assure you, our company's only interest is in modernizing outdated facilities. Like you modernized Mountain View's facilities." Marcus's quiet voice cut through the man's practiced speech. He stood, unfolding the illustrated newspaper. "Would anyone like to see what modernization looked like there?" The image of abandoned houses and broken windows passed through the crowd. Sarah heard Mary Beth's sharp intake of breath, saw the color drain from Mrs. Henderson's face as she recognized her cousin's home in the photograph. "The Clayton family has been selling out communities to Eastern Mill for 15 years. Sarah continued. "They come in promising progress, buy up the land for a fraction of its worth, then step aside while Eastern Mill drives out the workers who built these towns." Thomas's charm had vanished entirely now. "You can't prove any of this." "Actually," Marcus said, "we can." He nodded to Cooper, who had slipped in through the side door. The foreman now carried a leather portfolio. "These are land records from 3 counties, showing the pattern of Clayton family investments, followed by Eastern Mill takeovers. But more importantly," he withdrew the forged document they'd discovered. "This is a contract dated 3 months. Before your broken engagement to Sarah, care to explain why you were negotiating the sale of worker housing while courting one of those workers? The room erupted in angry voices. Sarah saw Thomas's mother clutch her pearls, saw the Eastern millmen conferring urgently, saw the mayor's face grow thunderous as he realized how close the town had come to disaster. But mostly, she watched the faces of her fellow mill workers as they understood the full scope of what had nearly happened to them. The betrayal, the calculation, the cold-hearted destruction of their community, all planned out in boardrooms and fancy Denver offices, with no thought for the lives they would destroy. Thomas Clayton's carefully constructed world was unraveling, one newspaper clipping at a time. The factory workers' petition covered the length of the mill's breakroom table, signatures filling every available space. Some were written in careful practice script, others in laboriously formed letters, and a few marked with simple X's. But each represented a life, a family, a stake in the future of Copper Springs. Sarah stood at the head of the table, her own signature prominent at the top, while around her gathered the people she'd worked beside for 8 years. 243 signatures, Mary Beth announced, finishing her count. That's every worker except the Clayton loyalists in management. Sarah nodded, studying the names she knew so well. Old Mrs. Patterson, who taught 3 generations of girls to run the looms. Young Jim Harper, supporting his widowed mother and 4 sisters. The Martinez family, who'd transformed the rocky soil behind their company house into a garden that helped feed half the neighborhood. It's not just about our jobs anymore, she told the assembled workers. The Claytons and Eastern Mill want to take everything, our homes, our community, our dignity. But we're not going to let them. They've already started, Eleanor spoke up from the back. Foreman docked my pay yesterday for taking too long at lunch, said new regulations are coming whether we like it or not. Angry murmurs filled the room. Sarah held up her hand for quiet. That's why we're organizing now. Marcus has been meeting with the other business owners in town. Once they understood that Eastern Mill would destroy local merchants as well as mill workers, many agreed to support us. But will it be enough, someone asked. Eastern Mill has lawyers, money, connections in Denver. And we have something stronger, Sarah replied. We have truth, justice, and most importantly, we have each other. She unrolled a second document, a list of demands and proposals that she and Marcus had worked on late into the night. This isn't just about stopping the sale. It's about making sure nothing like this can happen again. Mary Beth began passing out copies of the proposal. Sarah watched faces light up with understanding as they read. The plan was ambitious. Worker representation on the mill's board of directors, profit sharing for long-term employees, guaranteed housing rights, protection for the garden plots, and educational opportunities for workers' children. This is more than we ever dreamed of asking for, Mrs. Patterson said, wonder in her voice. Because we've been taught not to dream, Sarah answered, to accept whatever crumbs the Claytons and their kind choose to give us. But look around this room. Who actually makes this mill run? Who knows every machine, every process, every improvement that could make things better? We do. She moved around the table, meeting eyes she'd known since childhood. Marcus has offered to buy controlling interest in the mill, but not to own it outright. Under our proposal, workers would have the opportunity to buy shares over time. Through a cooperative agreement, we'd have a real voice in how things are run. The Claytons will fight this, Eleanor warned. They'll try to break us. Let them try. Sarah's voice held steel. Every worker who signs this petition is pledging to stand together. If they fire one of us, we all walk. If they try to evict one family, they'll have to evict us all. And Marcus has already arranged with other businesses to extend credit to workers during any work stoppage. A new energy filled the room. Not just anger or fear now, but hope. These were people who'd spent their lives being told they were replaceable, that their dreams didn't matter, that they should be grateful for whatever scraps fell from the Claytons' table. Now, they were starting to see themselves differently. There's risk, Sarah acknowledged. "I won't pretend this will be easy, but I look at this petition, at all your names together, and I see something the Claytons never counted on. They thought we were just workers, just numbers in their ledgers. They forgot that we're also neighbors, friends, family. They forgot that we know how to work together, how to support each other, how to fight for what's right." Mrs. Patterson stood, her weathered face determined. "I've worked in this mill for 40 years, saw my children and grandchildren follow me here. Never thought I'd see the day we'd have a real say in how things are run." She looked at Sarah with fierce pride. "You were always different, girl. Even as a child, you saw things others missed. Now you're helping us all see what's possible." One by one, others stood, a room full of people ready to fight for their future. Sarah felt the weight of their trust, their hope, their determination. She thought of Marcus's library, of all the books on economics and labor rights she'd been studying. Theory was becoming practice, ideas turning into action. "Tomorrow," she said, "we present our demands to the mill board. Tonight, spread the word. Make sure every family knows they're not alone. The Claytons thought they could divide us, use my humiliation to discredit any opposition. Instead, they gave us something stronger than fear. They gave us a reason to stand together." The petition lay before them, 243 names, promising solidarity. It wasn't just paper and ink anymore. It was a declaration of independence, a promise of change, a weapon forged from unity and hope. The coalition meeting minutes lay open on the makeshift table in the back room of Henderson's general store, the ink still fresh from that evening's gathering. Sarah studied the diverse list of attendees: mill workers, local merchants, ranchers, even the town's schoolteacher. What had begun as a labor dispute had grown into something larger, a community fighting for its soul. "Remarkable turnout," Marcus said quietly, standing beside her. "When Henderson offered his store for the meeting, I didn't expect half the business owners in town to show up." "They're starting to understand," Sarah replied. "Eastern Mill wouldn't just destroy the factory community. They'd undermine every independent business in Copper Springs." She traced a finger down the page of signatures. "Look here, even the banker's wife attended." "Mrs. Whitaker?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "The same woman who wouldn't look at you in church 3 months ago." Amazing how quickly social attitudes change when people's livelihoods are threatened. Sarah's tone held more amusement than bitterness, though I suspect her presence has more to do with Thomas Clayton jilting her niece in Denver to marry the railroad investor's daughter. Their conversation was interrupted by Mary Beth's arrival, her face flushed with excitement. "The printer's finished with the handbills. Cooper's men are distributing them now." She laid one on top of the meeting minutes. "Town Hall Meeting. The truth about Eastern Mill Corporation. Your community's future at stake." Sarah nodded approval. "Make sure every family gets one, especially those who couldn't attend tonight. The Claytons will try to paint this as just disgruntled workers causing trouble. We need everyone to understand what's really at stake." "Speaking of the Claytons," Marcus said, "my sources in Denver confirm they're bringing in hired muscle, professional strikebreakers disguised as new workers." A shadow crossed Sarah's face. "They'll try to provoke violence, give themselves an excuse to call in the territory marshal." "Already thought of that," Mary Beth interjected. "The women have organized a prayer circle in front of the mill every morning. Mrs. Patterson's idea said even hired thugs won't dare push past a line of grandmothers with Bibles." Sarah smiled, remembering how the older woman had stood up at the meeting, her quiet voice carrying unexpected authority. "They want to paint us as dangerous radicals." "Fine. Let's show them what radical Christian charity looks like. We'll pray for their souls while we protect our homes." The meeting minutes recorded other strategies. Merchants agreeing to extend credit to striking workers, ranchers offering temporary work to those who might be fired, the schoolteacher promising to continue lessons in private homes if the company closed the school. Each line represented another thread in the web of community support being woven around the factory workers. "Thomas is speaking at the Merchants Association tomorrow," Marcus reported, trying to convince them that modernization is inevitable, that fighting Eastern Mill will only hurt the town's growth. "And you'll be there to remind them what happened to businesses in Mountain View and Silver Creek after Eastern Mill finished. Modernizing those communities." Sarah gathered the minutes and other papers into her satchel. "Meanwhile, I need to meet with the Workers' Committee. Elena said she'd watch Katie and the other children in the library while we talk." Marcus touched her arm gently. "Be careful. The Claytons are getting desperate. Thomas was asking questions about your regular schedule, your usual routes through town." "Let them come after me," Sarah said, steel in her voice. "I'm not that frightened factory girl anymore, trying to prove I'm worthy of their world. They're the ones who should be worried now." As if to underscore her point, Henderson's wife entered with fresh coffee and a warning. "Clayton Sr.'s trying to call in banknotes early. Pressure people to withdraw support. But my Henry's been talking with other merchants. They're ready to band together, refuse all business with Clayton suppliers if he continues these tactics." The meeting minutes recorded this development in Mary Beth's careful hand. Merchants Protective Association proposed mutual defense against economic coercion. Another line of defense, another group choosing community over profit. Sarah gathered her shawl, preparing to leave for the Workers' Committee meeting. Through the store's window, she could see lanterns moving through the darkening streets, workers and supporters spreading the word, sharing resources, strengthening bonds that had always existed but had never been so vital. "We'll need to be ready," she told Marcus. "When they realize they can't break us individually, they'll try something bigger." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The community's with you, Sarah. All those years they looked down on factory workers, never realizing you were the ones holding this town together. Now, everyone's beginning to see it." The meeting minutes' final entry for the evening read, "Next. Steps. Prepare for direct confrontation. Trust in unity. Stand firm." Simple words for a complex battle, but looking at the list of signatures, former enemies now allies, proud merchants now standing with humble workers, Sarah felt the truth. Of them in her bones. The town hall keys felt heavy in Sarah's pocket as she climbed the steps in the pre-dawn light. As a member of the newly formed Community Protection Committee, she had the right to open the building, but today, those keys represented something more, the power to unlock change itself. Inside, the great hall stood empty, morning shadows painting stripes across the wooden floor through tall windows. In a few hours, this room would become a battlefield, though not the kind the Claytons were preparing for. Sarah moved quietly, lighting lamps, arranging chairs, placing documents on the podium. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" Marcus's voice came from the doorway. He carried a stack of legal papers under one arm. "The territorial governor's representative just arrived. He's reviewing our evidence now." Sarah nodded, touching the keys in her pocket. "And the Claytons? Thomas and his father are meeting with the Eastern Mill lawyers at the hotel. They've brought in 30 men. New workers, they're calling them, though Cooper says they're carrying more weapons than tool bags." "Let them," Sarah said calmly. "They're expecting a riot, fists and fury. We're giving them something else entirely." As if summoned by her words, Mary Beth slipped in through the side door, followed by a stream of women. They carried baskets of fresh bread, pots of coffee, plates of cookies. Without a word, they began setting up a hospitality table at the back of the hall. "Mrs. Patterson's idea," Mary Beth explained, arranging cups and saucers, "said if we're going to take the moral high ground, we might as well serve refreshments from up there." More people began arriving, merchants in their good suits, ranchers still dusty from morning chores, mill workers with heads held high despite their patched clothing. The hospitality table created a strange sort of democracy. Fine ladies and factory girls pouring coffee for each other, sharing bread and conversation. At precisely 9 o'clock, the Clayton contingent arrived. Thomas led the way, his face masked with practiced charm, though he faltered slightly at the sight of the peaceful gathering. Behind him came his father, the Eastern Mill representatives, and their hired muscle, trying to look inconspicuous in ill-fitting work clothes. "What's all this?" Clayton Sr. demanded, gesturing at the hospitality table. "This is Copper Springs," Sarah answered, stepping forward. "The real Copper Springs, not the one you're trying to sell to Eastern Mill. Would you care for some coffee, Mr. Clayton? Mrs. Patterson baked the bread fresh this morning in the house your company's trying to take from her." Before he could respond, the territorial governor's representative entered, accompanied by the mayor and town council. Sarah caught Marcus's slight nod. The morning's private meeting had gone as planned. "Ladies and gentlemen," the mayor began, his voice carrying authority earned through 30 years of service. "We're here to address serious allegations regarding the proposed sale of mill properties and its impact on our community." Thomas stepped forward, smooth as silk. "With respect, Mayor, this is a private business matter between the Clayton Mercantile Company and Eastern Mill Corporation. The town has no standing to interfere in a legitimate transaction." "No standing?" Sarah moved to the podium, removing the town hall keys from her pocket and placing them deliberately beside the territorial law books Marcus had brought. "Tell me, Mr. Clayton, when you were courting me, planning to sell my home out from under me, did you explain to Eastern Mill how many of their private business matters violated territorial law?" She opened the first law book to a marked page. Section 23, Paragraph 4. "No company may terminate established residential leases without providing equivalent housing or fair compensation." "The worker housing you're trying to sell? Those leases are ironclad, signed by your father himself." Clayton Sr.'s face darkened. "Now see here, I'm not finished." Sarah's factory-trained voice cut through his bluster. Section 47, conspiracy to defraud through false courtship or marriage promises. Yes, that's actually a law. And we have documented evidence of your son's involvement in exactly such a conspiracy. The territorial representative cleared his throat. "Having reviewed the evidence this morning, I can confirm that multiple violations of territorial law appear to have occurred. Furthermore, the proposed sale would violate newly enacted workers' protection statutes." Thomas's charm cracked. "This is absurd. A bunch of factory workers and their supporters can't—" "Can't what?" Marcus asked quietly. "Can't read law books, can't organize legally, can't protect their homes and livelihoods." He moved to stand beside Sarah. "While you were in Denver picking out wedding china with the railroad investor's daughter, your former fiancé was studying territorial law in my library. While you were plotting to destroy this community, its people were learning. To defend it," Sarah lifted another document from the podium. "We have a counter-proposal. The workers have formed a cooperative association, backed by local investors, including Mr. Blackwood. We're prepared to buy the mill ourselves at a fair market price, with legal guarantees protecting both worker interests and local businesses." The Eastern Mill representatives were already gathering their papers, reading the shift in power. They hadn't come to fight a legal battle against an organized community. They'd come to exploit a divided one. Clayton Sr.'s face had gone from red to purple. "You can't accept a fair price for the mill instead of Eastern Mill's inflated offer," Sarah finished for him. "Actually, sir, you can, and you will, because the alternative is a full territorial investigation into every land deal your family has made in the past 15 years. I believe we have some interesting documentation about Silver Creek that the authorities there would love to review." The morning sun had fully illuminated the hall now, catching the brass keys beside the law books. Sarah stood straight-backed. At the podium, no longer a factory girl reaching above her station, but a leader defending her community. The power to unlock change, indeed. The new factory charter gleamed with fresh ink on the mayor's desk, its carefully worded articles representing months of negotiation, planning, and dreams. Sarah stood with Marcus and the workers' committee, watching as one by one the signatures were added. Clayton Sr.'s shaky scrawl, the territorial representative's flowing script, her own clear hand, marking the dawn of a new era for Copper Springs. Article 1, the mayor read aloud for the assembled crowd. The Copper Springs Mill Cooperative Association shall be established as the legal owner and operator of all mill properties, with shares distributed between working members and community investors according to the attached schedule. Sarah Court. Mary Beth wiping away tears as the mayor continued through the articles they'd fought so hard to secure. Guaranteed housing rights, profit-sharing arrangements, worker representation on the board of directors, protection for the garden plots, and educational provisions for workers' children. To think, Mary Beth whispered, it all started with a broken engagement. But Sarah knew it had started long before that, in every moment of dignity denied, every dreams deferred, every quiet act of resistance by people who refused to be mere cogs in someone else's machine. The charter simply made official what had always been true. The mill's real strength lay in its workers, not its owners. Clayton Sr. sat stiffly in his chair, his face a mask of controlled fury as he watched his empire transform. Thomas had already fled to Denver, leaving his father to handle the final surrender. The Eastern Mill representatives had departed weeks ago, their dreams of easy profit shattered by community solidarity. Article 7, the mayor continued. The Cooperative Association shall establish a school of industrial arts, offering advanced training in textile manufacturing, machinery maintenance, and business management to all qualified workers and their children. Marcus squeezed Sarah's hand. The school had been his suggestion, inspired by their evenings in the library. Knowledge and opportunity, he'd said, those are the real engines of progress. The territorial representative added his final attestation to the charter, then stood to address the crowd. In my 15 years of service, I've never seen a community transform conflict into cooperation so effectively. The Copper Springs Mill Cooperative may well become a model for other territories to follow. Sarah stepped forward to sign her name. One final time, not as a factory girl or even as Mrs. Blackwood, but as the newly elected president of the cooperative's board of directors. The position had been offered to Marcus first, but he declined, saying the mill needed someone who understood it from the inside out. Don't forget where you came from, Mrs. Patterson had told her that morning, straightening Sarah's collar before the ceremony. But don't let anyone else forget where you've led us to either. The charter's final article spelled out the mill's new governance structure, a board comprising workers, investors, and community representatives, all working together to ensure the prosperity of both the business and its people. It wasn't charity or paternalistic benevolence. It was partnership, pure and simple. I hereby declare the charter ratified and recorded, the mayor announced, adding his own signature with a flourish. The crowd erupted in applause, but Sarah's attention was caught by movement at the back of the room. Elena had opened the doors, admitting a stream of children carrying flowers, Katie leading the way with a copy of Jane Eyre clutched proudly to her chest. They were the first students enrolled in the new school, their futures no longer limited by their parents' station or society's expectations. Article 10, Sarah heard the mayor continuing, but she already knew the words by heart. They were her words, written late one night in Marcus's library. The mill shall be operated not solely for profit, but for the betterment of all who labor within its walls and the community that supports it. For just as a single thread gains strength when woven into fabric, so too does each individual prosper when bound together in common cause. Clayton Sr. rose abruptly, already turning to leave, but Sarah's voice stopped him. "Mr. Clayton," she called, her tone free of triumph or malice, "won't you stay for the celebration? After all, you helped build this mill. You should see what it's becoming." He turned, looking at her properly for perhaps the first time, not as his son's inappropriate choice or a worker above her station, but as a woman who had outmaneuvered him with grace and justice rather than force. "You've won, Mrs. Blackwood," he said stiffly. "Isn't that enough?" "This isn't about winning," she replied, gesturing to the charter. "It's about building something that will last. Your name may not be on the mill anymore, but your grandchildren are still welcome to attend our school, to work here if they choose, to be part of what we're creating." He left without responding, but Sarah saw something flicker in his eyes, recognition perhaps of the world changing around him. The charter on the mayor's desk wasn't just a legal document, it was a bridge between the old ways and the new, between owners and workers, between what had been and what could be. Marcus joined her at the window, watching Clayton's departing figure. "Think he'll ever understand what really happened here?" Sarah touched the charter's fresh ink, feeling the texture of possibility beneath her fingers. "Maybe not, but his grandchildren will, and that's what matters." The wedding quilt spread across Sarah and Marcus's bed told 100 stories in fabric and thread. Every mill worker had contributed a square. Mrs. Patterson's block featured intricate cotton flowers, their petals formed from scraps of the first fabric she'd ever woven. Elena's square showed a ranch house and a factory standing side by side, connected by a golden thread. Mary Beth had pieced together a books and roses pattern, commemorating the library where Sarah and Marcus's deeper understanding had begun. "It's a proper marriage of textile art and storytelling," Sarah mused, touching the square that showed 2 hands clasped, one calloused from factory work, one weathered from ranching. Her mother had sewn that one, capturing the essence of Sarah and Marcus's partnership in simple, honest stitches. The afternoon sun streamed through their bedroom windows as Sarah prepared for their second wedding ceremony. The first had been a hasty affair in the church, born of necessity and defiance. This celebration planned after the mill charters. Signing would be different, not a rescue or a rebellion, but a true joining of hearts that had grown to know and cherish each other. "Are you ready?" her mother asked, entering with the dress they'd made together. Not her mother's altered gown this time, but a new creation combining silk from Marcus's connections and cotton from her beloved mill. The bodice featured a subtle pattern of interwoven threads, symbolizing how their separate lives had strengthened each other. "More than ready," Sarah replied, running her fingers over the quilt one last time. Each square represented not just the maker's skill, but their acceptance and support. These were the same people who had once whispered about her presumption in courting Thomas Clayton. Now they celebrated her marriage to an even wealthier man, not because of his status, but because they had seen how Sarah and Marcus fought for justice together. The ceremony would be held on the ranch with the mountains, painting a majestic backdrop. As Sarah descended the stairs, she found Katie waiting with a bouquet of wildflowers and roses, beauty cultivated and wild combined, just like the community they were building. "Mrs. Torres says the feast is ready," Katie reported proudly. Everyone helped. The mill workers brought bread and pies, the ranch hands prepared the beef, and the merchants contributed delicacies from Denver. Even Mrs. Clayton sent a cake, she added with wide eyes. Sarah smiled at this evidence of changing times. Rebecca Clayton's gesture might be more political than personal, but it represented progress nonetheless. The old social barriers were falling, replaced by recognition of each person's worth and contribution. Outside, the celebration was already beginning. Tables stretched across the ranch's front lawn, dressed in white cloths and decorated with flowers from both Sarah's factory friends' gardens and Marcus's carefully tended rose bushes. Mill workers and ranchers mingled easily, their children playing together while the adults shared food and conversation. The schoolteacher chatted with Mrs. Patterson about the new industrial arts program, while Eleanor taught Mary Beth her secret empanada recipe. Marcus waited beneath an arch of roses and cotton bowls, his grey eyes warming at the sight of her. He'd traded his usual practical ranching clothes for a formal suit, but his hands were still those of a working man. strong, capable, honest. When he took her hands in his, Sarah felt the rightness of it deep in her bones. The minister's words were traditional, but the ceremony itself was anything but. Cooper stood as Marcus's best man, while Mary Beth served as Sarah's matron of honor. The wedding quilt hung behind them, its patches catching the golden afternoon light, each square a testament to the community's blessing of their union. Marriage, the minister said, is like a tapestry. Each thread must be strong in itself, yet willing to be woven together with others to create something greater. Sarah and Marcus have shown us how two people from different worlds can join forces not just for their own happiness, but for the good of all. When they exchanged rings, Sarah noticed that mill workers and ranchers alike dabbed at their eyes. Their love story had become entwined with the community's own journey from division to unity, from prejudice to understanding, from inequality to partnership. The kiss they shared was sweet with triumph and promise, sealing a bond that had been forged in struggle and strengthened by shared purpose. As they turned to face their cheering friends and neighbors, Sarah caught sight of the quilt's central square, a simple design showing the sun rising over mountains and mill alike, illuminating a new day for all. The first rays of sunrise painted Blackwood Ranch in shades of promise, casting long shadows across the new mill buildings that had sprouted up alongside the original factory. Sarah stood on the porch of the ranch house, her morning coffee warming her hands as she watched the valley come to life. The sight of mill workers and ranch hands heading to their daily tasks together had become familiar now, but it still filled her with quiet pride. Another early morning, Marcus's voice came from behind her as he joined her on the porch, his own coffee cup steaming in the crisp air. "Old habits," she replied, leaning slightly against him. "Though I must admit, watching the sunrise from here is better than from the factory floor." The morning light caught the brass nameplate newly mounted beside the ranch house door. Sarah and Marcus Blackwood, Esther, 1875. Their home had become more than just a residence. It was the heart of their joint ventures, where ranch business and mill operations were discussed with equal importance over dinner, where workers from both enterprises felt welcome to bring their concerns or ideas. "Cooper says the new breeding program is showing promise," Marcus reported, gesturing toward the corrals where specially selected horses grazed. "And Mary Beth tells me the experimental cotton blend is exceeding expectations." Sarah nodded, pride warming her voice. The textile school students helped develop that blend. Katie's class, actually. They combined their knowledge of traditional weaving with new techniques from those engineering books you imported. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Belena, who carried a basket of fresh eggs and a knowing smile. "The governor's office sent another letter," she announced. "More questions about the cooperative model. And the Denver Post wants to interview Senora Sarah about the industrial school. They're calling it the Copper Springs Miracle," Marcus said, amusement touching his voice, "though there's nothing miraculous about people working together for common good." Sarah watched as the first workers began arriving at the mill, no longer trudging with tired resignation, but walking with purpose. The new shift schedule they'd implemented meant more rest between rotations, while the profit-sharing program had given everyone a stake in the mill's success. Even from the porch, she could see the fresh paint on the workers' houses, the flourishing, and gardens, the new playground where children gathered before school. "Remember when Thomas Clayton said factory workers could never understand proper business?" she mused. "Last month's production figures proved him wrong." Again, Marcus chuckled. "I saw his father in town yesterday. He actually tipped his hat to Mary Beth, nearly caused poor Mrs. Whitaker to faint dead away." The social landscape of Copper Springs had shifted as dramatically as its economic one. The old hierarchy based on birth and wealth had given way to a new order that valued contribution and character. The merchants who had once looked down on mill workers now praised their craftsmanship and business acumen. Even Rebecca Clayton had been seen taking tea with Mrs. Patterson, discussing plans for the new community library. "The railroad's coming through next month," Sarah noted, watching the sun climb higher. "On our route, not the Claytons' alternate path, because it makes better business sense," Marcus agreed. "A thriving community with a successful mill-ranch partnership offers more opportunities than a company town would have." They had proved that partnership in 100 ways over the past months. The mill's cotton waste was now used as fertilizer for the ranch's hayfields. Ranch hands helped with mill maintenance during slow seasons, while mill workers assisted with the harvest when extra hands were needed. The textile school offered classes in leatherworking alongside weaving, creating artisans skilled in both trades. Elena reappeared with fresh coffee and news from the kitchen. "Katie wants to know if she can use the library again this evening. She's teaching some of the younger children to read." Sarah smiled, remembering her own first encounter with Marcus's secret reading sessions. "Tell her yes, of course, and remind her that it's not a secret anymore. The library belongs to everyone now." The sun had fully cleared the mountains, illuminating a valley transformed by cooperation and vision. Where others had seen only profit potential, Sarah and Marcus had seen community possibility. Where the Claytons had planned to build walls, they had built bridges. "We should head in," Marcus said finally. "The board meeting's at 9, and I believe you're presenting the expansion plans." Sarah took a last look at the sunrise-painted valley, at the mill and ranch working in harmony, at the community they'd helped build, at the future stretching bright before them. "You know," she said, "Thomas Clayton did me the greatest favor of my life when he jilted me at that altar." Marcus's eyes crinkled with understanding. "Because it led you to all this. Because it taught me that sometimes life's worst moments can lead to its best changes," she replied, taking his arm. "Though I must say, your timing that day was impeccable." They shared a quiet laugh as they turned toward their home, leaving the sunrise to paint new possibilities across their shared domain. The new day promised challenge and opportunity in equal measure, but they would face it as they had faced everything since that fateful morning in the church. Together, stronger, for their differences united in purpose and heart. The family portrait hung in the mill's main office, capturing a moment both formal and intimate. Sarah sat in a carved wooden chair, her posture straight but relaxed, while Marcus stood beside her, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder. But what drew most visitors' eyes was the collection of people surrounding them. Not just blood relations, but the extended family they'd built. Elena's grandchildren, Katie clutching her beloved books, Mrs. Patterson beaming proudly, Mary Beth and Cooper standing like protective siblings. "First anniversary of the cooperative," Mary Beth explained to the newspaper reporter from Denver, who'd been studying the portrait with obvious curiosity. "We insisted on having it painted. Sarah wanted just her and Marcus, but we told her it wouldn't be right. The whole story is about family blood and chosen both." The reporter nodded, jotting notes in his leather-bound notebook. He'd come to write about the Copper Springs miracle, but found himself instead documenting a deeper transformation. The mill's productivity numbers and profit-sharing statistics were impressive, but they didn't capture the real change. That change was visible in 100 small ways. In the sound of children playing in the new schoolyard while their parents worked shorter, safer shifts. In the sight of former society, ladies and factory workers serving together on the library board. In the easy flow of people and goods between ranch and mill, each supporting the other's success. Mrs. Blackwood revolutionized everything. The reporter observed, watching Sarah through the office window as she discussed new weaving patterns with a group of workers. From factory girl to community leader, it's quite a story. Mary Beth shook her head. That's not how Sarah sees it. She says she just helped everyone recognize the power they already had. The real revolution was in people learning to see each other clearly, to value each other's worth. Outside, the afternoon sun gilded the scene. Ranch hands and mill workers sharing lunch in the communal garden, their children playing together without regard for their parents' occupations. The textile school's newest class was graduating next week. 20 students, including 3 from neighboring towns that wanted to replicate the Copper Springs model. "And Mr. Blackwood," the reporter asked, "how does he feel about his wife's prominence in the community?" As if in answer, Marcus appeared in the courtyard, returning from a morning of ranch business. Sarah looked up from her discussion, their eyes meeting with quiet warmth. There was no need for grand gestures or public displays. Their partnership spoke through actions, through the way they moved in unconscious harmony, each strengthening the other's purpose. "Marcus understands true worth better than anyone," Mary Beth replied. "He saw it in Sarah when others only saw her station. Now he helps others recognize it in themselves." The reporter watched as Marcus joined the group, adding his practical ranching experience to the discussion of new textile patterns. The workers showed no hesitation in debating points with him, their respect based on knowledge freely shared rather than authority imposed. "And the Claytons?" The reporter's pencil hovered over his notebook. "How have they adapted to the new order?" Mary Beth's smile held more triumph than malice. "Thomas married his railroad heiress in Denver. They don't visit much. But Clayton, Sr., well, something changed in him. He's been attending the textile school's lectures, learning about the industry he thought he understood. Even offered to teach a course on business negotiations next term." The family portrait caught the late afternoon light, each face telling its own story of transformation. Elena's grandson, now apprenticing as a ranch foreman, while studying business. At night, Katie, top of her class and dreaming of university. Mrs. Patterson's daughter, returning from Denver to teach at the industrial school she'd once been told was above her station. "The thing is," Mary Beth continued, watching the reporter's quick notes, "Sarah and Marcus didn't just change how the mill and ranch work. They changed how we all see ourselves and each other. That's their real legacy." Through the window, they could see Sarah and Marcus walking together toward the new library building, their steps matched to each other's rhythm. The sight of them, the factory girl and the rancher who defied society's expectations, had become a symbol of Copper Springs itself, proof that the greatest strength comes not from power over others, but from lifting each other up. The family. Portrait captured that truth in oil and canvas, preserving not just faces, but a moment of transformation. A year had passed since the cooperative's founding, but the real story was written in the daily lives of people who had learned to see themselves and their community through new eyes. Sarah's diary lay open on her desk in the ranch house study, its pages filled with a year's worth of reflections. Her latest entry captured a moment that had brought their journey full circle. Today, a young woman arrived at the mill seeking work. Like me, she came from a factory town back east, hoping to escape the grinding poverty and limited horizons. I saw in her eyes the same desperate determination I once carried, but unlike my arrival years ago, she found not exploitation, but opportunity. Elena's granddaughter showed her the worker housing, not cramped tenements, but dignified homes, with garden plots and fresh paint. Katie, now teaching basic arithmetic to new workers' children, offered to include the woman's young sister in her classes. By day's end, Mary Beth had already added the newcomer's name to the textile school's evening program. Looking at her, I remembered standing at that altar a year ago, thinking my world had ended. I couldn't see then that it wasn't an ending at all but a beginning, not just for me, but for an entire community. The diary's pages held other victories, large and small. The day the first profit-sharing checks were distributed, workers weeping as they held money they'd earned not just with their hands, but with their minds and hearts. The evening Clayton Sr. had publicly apologized at a town meeting, admitting that his greatest business error had been undervaluing his workers' worth. The morning, the territorial governor arrived to study their cooperative model, leaving with plans to recommend similar programs throughout the territory. Marcus entered the study quietly, carrying 2 cups of evening tea. "Writing again?" Sarah smiled, accepting the cup. "Recording today's small miracle. Did you see young Tommy's face when Cooper promoted him to assistant foreman? The same look you had when you first discovered the library, Marcus observed, settling into his chair beside her desk. That moment of realizing the world is bigger than anyone told you it could be. Through the window, they could see the lights of worker homes twinkling in the dusk, smoke rising from chimneys in the cool evening air. The mill's evening shift would be ending soon, its workers heading home to warm meals and family time, no longer exhausted by endless hours at the looms. "I received a letter from Thomas today," Sarah said, touching her diary. "He's setting up a new mill in Denver. Wants to know if we'd consult on implementing some of our workers' programs there." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "And will we?" "I think we should. Not for Thomas's sake, but for his workers. Every factory girl deserves the chance to rise, to learn, to build something meaningful." She turned to a fresh page in her diary, ink catching the lamplight as she wrote, "Perhaps that's the greatest lesson of this past year. True change doesn't come from fighting against the old world, but from building a better one." Marcus and I didn't just defy society's expectations. We created new expectations, showed what's possible when people are given the chance to grow into their full potential. The evening settled around them like a comfortable shawl as Sarah continued writing, Marcus reading quietly beside her. Their contentment wasn't just in each other, but in the knowledge that their story had become part of something larger. Every day, more communities sent representatives to study the Copper Springs model. Every week, new students enrolled in the textile school, dreaming bigger dreams than their parents had been allowed to dream. Sarah's final diary entry for the evening read, "A year ago, I stood in a church believing love had betrayed me, not understanding that real love, whether between two people or within a community, is built on respect, recognition of worth, and the courage to imagine something better. Marcus saw in me what I hadn't yet seen in myself. Together, we helped others see it too. That's the real miracle of Copper Springs. Not that one factory girl rose above her station, but that an entire community learned to rise together." She closed the diary gently, its pages holding not just her story, but the story of every person who dared to believe in the possibility of change. Outside, the first stars appeared above the mountains, their light touching both ranch and mill, both past and future, both what had been and what was yet to come. Marcus reached for her hand in the gathering darkness. No words were needed, their fingers intertwined with the easy familiarity of two people who had learned to dance together, to work together, to build together. Their love story had become Copper Springs' story, and through their example, perhaps other communities' stories as well. The diary on the desk held one last truth, written in Sarah's clear hand. Some say our story is about revenge or redemption, but really it's about recognition of worth, of possibility, of the strength we all carry within us. Marcus and I didn't just find each other that day in the church. We found a way to help others find themselves.